Let's talk about noise cancel for a second. I covered the auto noise cancel in the basic section, but there is a manual way you can do that. Now, noise cancel gets rid of any electromagnetic interference that the detector might pick up, like from satellite dishes, electrical power lines, things like that. It compensates for that. So to manual noise cancel, here's all you do. You switch your machine on, go to your menu select button, and scroll through until you see noise cancel, and mine happens to be on +2. This will go from +2 to -2 in steps of 1. You use your minus or plus keys to switch it from one channel to another, but when you do that, you need to raise your coil about a foot off the ground, and it only takes one button push per adjustment. That's 1, 0. You can go through these until you find a stable channel if you think the auto function hasn't auto adjusted adequately. And once you select your channel, hit pinpoint detect, and you're ready to go. Now let's talk about ground balancing. We covered the way to auto ground balance in the basic section, but there are two ways you can adjust your ground balance based on the kind of soil you're detecting on. Normal is for normal ground, and beach is for the beaches. You hit your ground balance button, and you raise and lower your coil from about 1 inch off the ground to about 6 inches. You don't want to bounce the coil off the ground. You hear a high tone, and if you hear a high tone, you use your minus key to lower the number to where there is an equal mix of low and high tones or no tone at all. And if you happen to be on the other end of the scale, you'll hear a low tone, and you use your plus key to increase that number to where there is an equal mix. Now that's in the normal mode. Now if you want to go to beach ground balance, in your ground balance mode, you hit your ground balance button again, hold it for 3 seconds, and you'll see the beach icon appear there. And then you ground balance the exact same way while you're on the beach. Once you're finished ground balancing, you hit your pinpoint detect button, and you're back in your main detecting mode. And see, your beach icon will stay there if you are in beach mode. In order to shut that back off and go back to normal ground balance, you go back to your ground balance mode, hold the button in for 3 seconds, it disappears, hit your pinpoint detect button, and you're all set. Now, having your machine properly ground balanced is going to help target ID accuracy. It's going to increase your detector's overall stability and also help you run at a higher sensitivity level. Auto ground balance is going to be the best setting for you 99 out of 100 times, but if you want to run in manual, consider using auto to start with and then manually fine-tune in either direction. Some people even will positively ground balance by a couple numbers. That helps with target ID accuracy and also helps rejection of ground mineralization. Now, if the ground you're working on is pretty stable and your ground balance numbers as you adjust are only changing by a couple, say from 22 to 26, consider leaving it in 24 and detecting. If the numbers are wildly erratic, going from the 20s to the 40s, consider using the tracking function. Tracking will dynamically adjust your ground balance as you detect. But what you need to be aware of is that if you detect a signal and it's not a strong enough signal to go straight to pinpoint, you need to disable your tracking and sweep back over it. Otherwise, the tracking could adjust to the target. If you go straight to pinpoint, tracking is automatically disabled. Let's talk a bit more about ground balancing. The Xterra 70 has normal and beach modes of ground balance, and as you'd expect, you use the normal mode for normal mineralized ground conditions and the beach mode for any combination of magnetic and conductive ground conditions, as on the beach with dry, damp, and wet sand. But here's a little tip for you. You can't use the normal mode on the beaches, but you might be able to use beach mode on mineralized ground if you run across a patch of ground that's very noisy and very difficult for even normal ground balance. And you can also use the tracking ground balance function to show you the changing ground conditions, because when you select tracking ground balance and leave the ground balance display up, you see the numbers changing as the ground conditions change. Now back over to the beaches. When you move from the lighter colored sand, which is dry, to the darker colored sand, which is damp but not completely soaked, and some people refer to this as the transition area, you'll see a huge change in ground balance numbers. Higher numbers indicate wetter sand with a higher saline content. Lower numbers usually indicate a lower saline content and drier sand. Now, tracking ground balance can handle this just fine, but if you prefer using a fixed ground balance setting, consider detecting these areas separately. Set your ground balance for dry sand, detect that part of the beach, then move on to the damp section, ground balance for that part, etc., etc. This lets you avoid having to ground balance every time you pass between the dry, damp, and wet sand areas.
Now let's take a closer look at the sensitivity setting. Now, if you've ground balanced your machine and you've also noise cancelled and you find that your threshold is still fluttering in and out, take a look at the sensitivity. Imagine you're driving your car in the fog. You've got your high beam and your low beam. You set on your high beam, all you see is a blanket of white. You don't see very much, but when you dip your headlight, then you can see more clearly. It's the same with your detector and its sensitivity. If you overpower, you're masking out some targets.